Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Weekly Wisdom with me, Sam, the Stoic teacher. If it's your first time here, I'm a philosophy and theology graduate from the University of Cambridge, and I now have the pleasure of teaching philosophy and religious studies in South London. In Weekly Wisdom, we look at ancient wisdom for modern times. Now this week is a special edition with the man who has changed my life more than any other living man, and embarrassingly, I told him this when I interviewed him. Donald Robertson wrote a book called Stoicism and the Art of Happiness that I discovered back in 2017 when I was deeply unhappy. I weighed 322 pounds, which is 23 stone, and I was morbidly obese, and quite frankly, my life was at risk. Discovering his book introduced me to the philosophy of Stoicism and resulted in me losing over 100 pounds of weight in 6 months. In the series of videos featuring Donald, we'll discuss topics ranging from the Stoic response to coronavirus, to whether Jordan Peterson is a Stoic, to what Donald Trump and Boris Johnson could learn from the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and you're really in for a treat. Without further ado, let's roll the intro and get going with some more ancient wisdom for modern times. Thank you for joining me.
Strength, perseverance, self-control.
I think that question is probably more pertinent now in our generation than it has been for quite some time to people. Because, you know, we've been hit by what many of my university professors would describe as a category collapse, probably for the first time in our generation with the global COVID-19 pandemic. And, you know, I know for one that I've seen, you know, a swathe of visitors to my page now looking for answers, as it were, about resilience. I mean, have you found something similar?
Yeah. Everybody's suddenly really interested in it. So, you know, for you, the Stoics were saying it might be a good idea to psychologically prepare in advance for catastrophes. Well, why would we need to do that? That's a crazy idea. And then suddenly they're like, oh, maybe we should have listened to them actually, after all. But, so, you know, like the pandemic, you know, or as I like to describe it, this thing that people have been telling us is probably going to happen for ages, right? Like everyone said, eventually there's going to be a viral pandemic. You know, everyone's seen that TED talk that Bill Gates did where he was talking about we need to prepare for it. Like, so everyone just ignored that as well. Like, so this big surprise event that was kind of obviously going to happen sooner or later. We're incredibly lucky that this is the fatality rate of this virus is so low. Like, it's, you know, it's pretty nasty, but we're really lucky it's not something much, much worse. Ebola has a 50% fatality rate. You know, so you could say there are positive aspects to this, like in the sense that if we weren't hit with the coronavirus, we could have been hit with something with a much higher fatality rate. So at least coming out of this, you know, probably we're going to be motivated to be better prepared for future, possibly far more life-threatening pandemics that we're going to have to. There's another shocker. You know, there's probably going to be other ones. Like, you know, it's not the only one that's ever going to happen. Like, if you look at human history, and a good example would be the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius lived through a much worse pandemic, the Antonine Plague. We don't know exactly what it was or how many people it killed, but we think it might have been smallpox or something like that. And we think it killed up to about 5 million people throughout the known world. It was pretty serious. Much more severe than the pandemic we're facing at the moment. But throughout history, we've had these things like Spanish flu, for example. So the Stoics would say to us that the wise man never acts surprised. The wise man never says, I can't believe this is happening, because that would seem ridiculous to him. You would say, well, yeah, like, of course, like diseases happen. It's part of life. And the Stoics tell us, particularly Seneca, every day to imagine, you know, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow. Imagine losing your job. Imagine your partner breaking up with you. Like, imagine people blaming you for things that you didn't do. Like, you know, imagine poverty, imagine exile, imagine death, you know, all things that could potentially happen to you, so that you never find yourself in a situation going, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Because anything like this, you could potentially anticipate in the general sense. Like, you know, it's not a huge shocker that there's a pandemic happening. Like, they happen periodically. And, you know, so being prepared for these kind of things happening is very important. Being prepared for setbacks in life in general is really what the Stoics want to teach us. I'll tell you what I like to say to people, and this is a slight exaggeration, but I like to say it anyway, just to make a kind of rhetorical point. you could say that the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, which is one of the most widely read self-help classics in European history, is essentially a training manual for developing precisely the kind of psychological resilience skills required to survive a pandemic, because he wrote it in order to help himself cope psychologically with a pandemic. Like, he was in the middle of one when he was writing it, and it ran the whole course of the period while he was writing that book. He was dealing with other things. He was dealing with a war as well, and a lot of other issues. In fact, he only ever mentions the pandemic once in the Meditations. But many of the other things he's saying, if you imagine the context in which he's writing, a lot of the techniques he's using must have been applied by him to the stress and the challenges that he was facing as a result of the Antonine Plague. So you could say, the Meditations, if only there was some kind of guidebook as to how to cope with a situation like this. But the Meditations is literally Marcus Aurelius talking himself through the process of coping with a pandemic.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, I was going to say, what would the Stoic advice be on coping with this? But I think you pretty much said it. Read the Meditations.
There's lots of Stoic. I mean, there are many. The first book I wrote on Stoicism, I tried to list all the psychological techniques I could find in the Stoic literature. And broadly speaking, I found about 18 distinct psychological strategies. So there's a whole bunch of things that the Stoics would tell us to do. And we can talk about this and we can build courses around it. But, actually, one of the most fundamental things they would say is a little bit harder for people to deal with. And, but it's more fundamental. The Stoics' arguably strongest and most fundamental piece of advice about this pandemic would be to say to people, look, you need to accept the fact that your death isn't entirely under your control. And, at the moment, you're struggling with the fact that you could go to the supermarket and catch a virus that, if you're unlucky, might kill you. Well, you might get hit by a bus tomorrow. The mortality isn't entirely under your control anyway. You're going to die eventually. And, one of the fundamental messages of Stoicism is you need to come to terms with your own mortality and accept the fact that circumstances can change. And, you're going to, if you're lucky, you might live to old age, but not everybody does. And, you can't always predict, what's going to happen to you or how you're going to die. And part of, living wisely is coming to terms with that fact and not being, really shocked when it happens. The coronavirus, the vast majority of people are going to die from something else. All the coronavirus really is just highlighting the mortality to them. And maybe, when this goes away, if and when this passes, is everybody just going to go back to normal and lapse back into complacency? Or are they going to, take some kind of insight from it and learn to appreciate, the time they have more fully? Live more in the here and now and make better use of, not spend as much time watching reality TV and on Facebook and stuff like that, because you could just get hit by a bus tomorrow, for all you know. That's what the Stoics want us more fundamentally. So a Stoic wise man who's kind of trained his or herself to think like that anyway isn't going to be particularly thrown by a pandemic or a war or something like that. They're going to think, oh yeah, this could kill me, but so could lots of other things. It's the general problem of mortality that we need to deal with. I think that they would say that's one of the biggest things that we're facing now. Our own mortality has just become more obvious to us. Our own vulnerability has just become a little bit more obvious to us. But it's there all the time in the background. We just ignore it. And it raises this question that Seneca likes to talk about of, how do we actually use our time sensibly in life? Nobody, I like to say, I don't think anyone, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe somebody has, but I don't think anyone has ever had engraved on their tombstone, I wish I'd spent more time on Facebook. But this what Stoics want us to think like that. They want us to think when you're looking back on this, are you going to think, I'm glad that I didn't miss any episodes of Big Brother? Are you going to think, geez, I wish I'd actually done more stuff. I wish I'd taken more risks. So, with the life that I had. And I think maybe this big shake-up is going to get people to just experience some existential anxiety and question things more deeply.